Hello everybody, today is the 21st of September 2024 and we're going to continue with our series of lessons about the history of the church, and this is number 7, and I thought that perhaps we should discuss a little bit, introduce Islam. Okay, we have dealt with all the problems and the fights and everything else of the first centuries that the church had to deal with, several heresies and all kinds of things, and we're going to see now Islam, and let's see, and obviously it's going to be, as you can imagine, a very general introduction, and I will do the best I can. So first of all, well before Muhammad, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, in the 6th, 7th century, okay, before that we are going to see the Semitic peoples of Arabia. We're going to look into that history and who they were. Okay, because a lot of things are going to be extremely important. Mecca, for example, was already, well before Muhammad, a place of extreme religious importance. So let's start. So the inhabitants of Arabia, of a Semitic race, were, for the most part, were the descendants of Abraham too, through the line of Ishmael, according to sacred scripture. Abraham had 2 wives. The first one, Sarah. He had a son, Isaac, and with the second wife, who was a slave, Hagar, he had Ishmael. Okay, now in some places, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, sometimes it is read that he had 3 wives, Sarah, Hagar, and Keturah. But so there is a tradition of that, but it seems that both Keturah and Hagar were the same one. Okay, so the Britannica says each of these views find scriptural support for its position, that the three wife opinion relies on Genesis. Okay, so in any case, certainly 2 wives and 2 sons there, Isaac and Ishmael. Due to Sarah's jealousy, we can see all this in Genesis. Hagar, the slave, had to go to the desert, according to tradition, which would be the desert of Arabia. And according to tradition, the slave was next to a well of water, and an angel of Yahweh appeared to her, announcing a blessing, a prophecy. This is in Genesis, okay? It's actually interesting. Now Sarah, the wife of Abraham, had brought forth no children. This is Genesis 16. But having a handmaid, an Egyptian named Hagar, she said to her husband, "Behold, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. Go in unto my handmaid. It may be I may have children of her at least." And when he agreed to her request, she took Hagar the Egyptian, her handmaid, 10 years after they first dwelt in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband to wife. And he went in to her, but she, perceiving that she was with child, despised her mistress. And Sarah said to Abraham, Thou dost unjustly with me. I gave my handmaid into thy bosom, and she, perceiving herself to be with child, despiseth me. The Lord judge between me and thee. And Abraham made answer and said to her, Behold, thy handmaid is in thy own hand. Use her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai afflicted her, she ran away. The way I understand it is that, okay, Sarah wanted to give Abraham, the handmaid, but she was already with child, and that is perhaps why she wasn't particularly pleased. And when Sarah afflicted her, she ran away. And the angel of the Lord, having found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, which is in the way to Sur in the desert, he said to her, Agar, handmaid of Sarah, whence comest thou? And whither goest thou? And she answered, I flee from the face of Sarah my mistress. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Return to thy mistress, and humble thyself under her hand. And again he said, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. And again, behold, said he, Thou art with child, and thou shalt bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. He shall be a wild man, his hand will be against all men, and all men's hands against him, and he shall pitch his tents over against all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spoke unto her, Thou the God who hast seen me. For she said, Verily here have I seen the hinder parts of him that seeth me. Okay, all right, so so she's there next to a well of water, and an angel appeared to her and announced a blessing. Okay, Abraham was 87 at this time. In the desert, Agar, half death of hunger and thirst, began desperately to look for water because she was afraid of the death of her child Ishmael, when suddenly she heard the voice of an angel who reiterated to her again God's decision. This is in Genesis 21. And that well is sacred today. It is considered sacred by all the descendants of Ishmael. It is called the Zamzam well, and it is a well located within the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. It is located about 20 meters, 66 feet, east of the Kaava, the holiest place. Okay, Mecca. Okay, so the Zamzam well then disappears kind of from biblical story until we see Ishmael again at Abraham's death with Isaac, his brother. Then there will be Bedouins who shortly after were looking. Well, the story they were looking for a lost camel and found that well, etc., etc. In any case, this is in the city of Mecca. Okay. And these Bedouins took Agar and Ishmael as their own protectors. According to Arabic tradition, Ishmael married a daughter of a prince, had a very large family, which is the beginning of the Arab peoples. They would rebuild the primitive temple, which they will call Kaava, helped by Father Abraham himself. There is one stone, a miraculous stone, which served the patriarch as scaffolding as he was going up and down while he was building the temple. According to tradition, the footprints of the patriarch are still there on that stone. But only those who are fervent Muslims can see them. This stone, embedded in the corner of the outer wall of the Kaava, the temple, was originally made of the whitest hyacinth, but little by little, gradually, this stone will blacken due to the sins of man. Muslims believe that it was here, in this place, where Abraham actually got ready to comply with the divine order by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. All right, extremely important this. So we all know about Isaac and the sacrifice and so on, the text. And it is there too. It is here where Ishmael is buried. Kaava has always been considered a holy place, even long before the birth of Muhammad. This is important to bear in mind. This particular group of Semitic peoples saw themselves already as the descendants of Ishmael, one of Abraham's sons. So Mecca already has been important well before Muhammad. Mecca was already a holy city, or at least a sacred city. When the pilgrims and a place of pilgrimage. Okay, so when the pilgrims reach this stone, they have to circle it 7 times. Then you touch it and kiss it, and then after that you so then you go to the well of Zamzam. Yeah. The religion of the inhabitants of Arabia at the time consisted in a kind of polytheism, quite rudimentary polytheism. They would offer sacrifices, obviously, to the stars and the stones, like the people of Israel. Above all, the divinities, nevertheless, the divinities, even though they were polytheistic, above all the divinities was Allah, okay, which means God, a supreme God who ordains all things. Each tribe before Muhammad, okay, we're always talking here well before Muhammad. All tribes always had their own temple according to each particular worship, but there was always a special temple that belonged to all these local and regional faiths, and it was precisely the Kaava and the Black Stone, a sort of national sanctuary where large caravans of pilgrims would come. In this polytheistic world, there were already many settled Jewish colonies. Okay, the temple at Jerusalem had been destroyed, you remember, by Titus in the year 70. Diaspora. There were Jewish people already, settled in many different parts of that part of the country, of the world. So there were Jewish colonies, but nevertheless its region among the Arabic people had its gods and venerated their own spirits. Out of all those towns, the sacred city, Mecca, in the west coast of what is now Saudi Arabia, it would become, because of those pilgrimages, an important commercial center where caravans passed, and and that linked Palestine and Syria, especially under one, we would say now, oligarchy of rich men, perhaps, an oligarchy of many merchants. And the most successful and the richest oligarchy or merchant tribe was the tribe of the Quraysh. And Muhammad was born into this most powerful tribe, the Quraysh, in Mecca around the year 570 AD. The power of the Quraysh tribe derived from their role as I said, very successful merchants. There were several trade routes that intersected at Mecca, and these allowed the Quraysh tribe to control trade along the west coast of Arabia, north to Syria also, and south to Yemen. This is important, it's not a minor detail. Now, over time, the influence of the Jewish colonies and of Christian Ethiopian Christians in Arabia opened the Arabs towards different religions already. Okay, so they were polytheists, themselves, and then there were the Jewish people, and then there were many heretical Christian sects, as we will see. So there were obviously many different religions around, okay? Local religions, regional religions, and all, and what they're going to see is that two of them actually are monotheistic religions, the Jewish religion and the Christian religion. Let's look at this type of Christian religion that they were exposed to. This is going to be important for how Muhammad is going to understand Christianity. Okay, so let's go to the 6th century, the 500s, okay? So, as we know, the center of the Islamic world, the Arabic world, rather, is located in, obviously, Arabia. Now we call it Saudi Arabia. This was actually outside the frontiers of the Roman Empire. Not a minor detail, because Rome civilized. When I say civilize, it is the word used by the Romans. Perhaps today we would say integrate or assimilate, okay? So Rome civilized those places, geographical places, wherever they went. Culture, religion even. It was certainly the means by which Christianity spread so quickly also in civilized Rome. But in the world civilized by Rome, I should say. The majority of the Arabs in the 7th century, in the 600, who inhabited the Arabian Peninsula, lived in groups, in tribes, and led a nomadic life. And they were constantly threatening the borders of the empire. The limits were Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul, Persia, and the Kingdom of Ethiopia. In the interior part of the peninsula, this area was just an immense desert plateau, dotted with oases where the Bedouins, with their camels, would go towards the northern part of the peninsula, the province of Syria and Palestine, and towards also the northeast towards the Persian Empire. Now, so that was the situation. Now, the Prophet Muhammad, what is the official history of the Prophet Muhammad? What do Muslims themselves tell us. The official history is, okay, he was born in Mecca in the year 571. He belonged, as we have said, to the tribe of the Quraysh, a merchant, a Levitical tribe, which had its economic interests in the city, especially those who handled the reception of the pilgrims that were going to the Kaava, to the temple. He was orphaned from a very early age. I'm not sure whether it is 6 or 10, because I see both, but certainly from the age of 10, a little boy, orphan boy, was brought up by an uncle, hardworking, generous, himself without much fortune, a, quote, a guardian of flocks that involved actually also shepherding caravans. Sort of a tourist guide, a little bit. Right. So Muhammad's life as an adult is going to change dramatically when he enters into the service of a very wealthy woman, a widow, and eventually marries her. Her name was Khadija, his first wife. And we have I have some dates here. Circa 554 to November 619. He was his first wife and the first follower of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, says the encyclopedia. Okay, she was the daughter of a very successful merchant of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca. Okay, now probably, I don't know quite if it is so. Some historians suggest that she might have been of a Jewish descent, and they give the reasons why. We don't know, but she might have been of the Jewish race. Very soon, when he entered her service, he became her best trusted friend, and she herself offered herself to him in marriage. Muhammad was at the time about 29 years old. After 11 years of marriage, Muhammad started seeing visions, locutions from God, about being chosen as a prophet, one of God's at first, I'm going, chronologically, at first, one of God's prophets to teach the Arab people the monotheistic faith, so that the Arab peoples would leave behind their local and regional polytheism and become monotheistic, one only sole God, one God. That was his first enterprise. Soon after, he would become a preacher, asking for complete submission to the will of Allah, to the will of God, the only omnipotent God, and he actually warned unbelievers, those who were not monotheists. He threatened them actually with eschatological punishments, meaning the end of the world, the ultimate fate of humanity. Eschatological punishment are punishment that are meted out in the afterlife. All right. So we have Muhammad had by then actually come into contact with what Muslims call the men of the book, both Jews and Christians. This is another not an insignificant detail. because the Christian world in which Muhammad comes into contact is going to be a heterodox Christian world, a heretic world. Is that world of the Arians? We saw them in, the first, I think, the third video, okay? They denied the divinity of Christ, yeah? So, and the Nestorians, okay? The Nestorianism is also another Christian heresy, originated in Asia Minor and in Syria around the 5th century AD, and it is based on the teachings of the Bishop of Constantinople, Nestorius. It is characterized by the belief that Christ's divine and human natures are independent. I'm not going to argue this one now, okay? But it is, let me see if, what else the Britannica tells me here. A Nestorian, a member of the Christian sect that is a member of a Christian sect that originated in Asia Minor, okay, and Syria in the 5th century AD, inspired by the views of Nestorius. Nestorians stress the independence of Christ's divine and human natures. Nestorian scholars played a prominent role in the formation of Arab culture after the Arab conquests of Persia. Nestorianism also spread to India, China, Egypt, and Central Asia, where certain tribes were almost entirely converted. Today, the Nestorians are represented by the Church of the East or Persian Church, usually referred to in the West as the Assyrian or Nestorian Church. Most of its members, who number more than 200,000, live in Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Okay, so these are the Christians that Muhammad is going to know. This is what he's going to get from Christianity, all right? Initially, he convinced his relatives, his wife, his cousin Ali, and his friends to follow him, saying that polytheism went against the first tradition of the Arab peoples. He said that they had to go back to their origin, the ancient traditions of the Arabs, and that tradition was that there was only one God. He denounced also the abuses that the merchants were involved in Mecca, the ones who were taking advantage of the pilgrims, the rich, from which tribe he came. He denounced those abuses because it was that in Mecca was a transit place, okay, for the pilgrims. We can see that at this early time he was a sort of a preacher. You can see that he's a very enthusiastic preacher, and he's also going to take a sort of a political, let's say that, a political side to him about caring for, the poor and, denouncing the rich and so on. So at this I hope I'm not offending anybody, but it seems to me that at this very, very early stage, he's a sort of a mixture of Billy Graham and Che Guevara kind of thing, all right? Caring for both sides of it. All right. All these, his preaching, he was obviously successful, caused a great popular stir. Certainly the poor and the workers naturally began to support Muhammad, until his very own tribe, the Quraysh, killed some of his followers, yes, and attempted against his own life. He was just saying things and doing things that were going against their financial interests, let's put it that way. So he decides to abandon Mecca, his hometown, and according to the official history, he was accompanied by an angel. He's going to go up from Mecca to Yathrib. Yathrib is a nearby city, a good city, fertile soil, good harvest. That city is going to then become Medina, which means the city of the prophet. But this is an extremely important point, this moment, the departure from Mecca to Medina is the point of departure for Islam, as it were. His wife, Yadiha, died after 25 years of marriage, and Muhammad would enter into 11 formal unions, for the time being, perhaps due to reasons of power and wealth. But here in Medina now, there's going to be another change. He is going to change tactics now. He's no longer going to be this revolutionary preacher. He's going to think about it, change tactics, and become not just a rebel preacher, as he was at the beginning, but a political leader as well, and a warrior, devoting himself to two main objectives. One, religion, the other one, politics. Okay, one, organize and regulate a new movement with a religious character. For this, he will begin establishing a new doctrine, which he maintained had been dictated by God. He will present it at first as a continuation of the religion of Abraham, the continuation of a kind of Judaism as he saw it at the time. And this will end all tribal divisions. To achieve this, he will build a temple, the first mosque, ordering that this be the meeting point of his followers, who will be by now calling themselves Muslims, meaning men who are subject to God. So that is the regulating. So he's regulating, he's organizing worship. This is the religious part, okay? A new religious movement. The second has a political character to it. He's going to undertake a campaign against Mecca. And in less than 2 years, perhaps, fighting corruption, right? So in less than 2 years, in this small town of Medina, he will begin his new cause. Got quite a following. The only ones who definitely refused to go along, were actually the Jews there, because on the one hand, they absolutely refused to recognize, naturally, the prophetic gifts of a man who was not Jewish. So that wasn't going to happen, okay? On the other, there were certain commercial interests too. They weren't particularly happy about the preachings of this man. So he's going now to declare open war on Mecca, seeing the people there in Mecca as the, quote, fallacious interpreters of Abraham's will. With this in mind, he is going to signal an objective, a holy war. A holy war. How? Why? What? First, to conquer Mecca and turn it into the central heart of Islam. All right, so numerous Bedouins will answer the call. In the year 630, he had about some 10,000 men gathered to march on Mecca and to occupy it. They did reach the Kaava, the temple. They circled it 7 times, took possession of it, renounced all idols, and proclaimed the law of a new religion whose only God was Allah, leaving there nevertheless only the black stone, symbol of divinity. Well, to cut a very long story short, his tribe and other tribes will eventually accept defeat, and the new religion will recognize Muhammad as the prophet. At his death in the year 632, the religious and political unity of the whole of the Arabian Peninsula was now a fact. It had been accomplished. Now, it is important to note what influenced, let's dwell on that a little bit, the thought of Muhammad and his doctrine. First, regarding the Jews, they had long been established there. They had commercial centers in the east and even near Mecca, as we saw earlier. They were well established. The Christians, for their part, had got here to these lands from Syria, Abyssinia, Egypt, and Asia Minor. Abyssinia was Ethiopia and Eritrea until 5 minutes ago, and the 1940s. Okay, let me see. I think all right. But not all those Christians, I want to dwell on this a little bit because it is important, not all those Christians were Orthodox. Most of them actually were, as I said, Arians and Nestorians, in other words, heresies. Under the influence of Jews and these Christians, even before Muhammad, some of the Arabs had already abandoned idolatry and polytheism, the devotion to false gods, and were now quite happy to accept the worshipping of only one God only. Muhammad had personally known these Christians and Jews, actually quite closely as a matter of fact. In his travels accompanying merchants, he had come into contact with them. But remember again that what he's going to hear, bits and pieces of Christianity, is going to come from people called Christians, but who do not accept that Christ is the Son of God. So this is going to create problems. As for his contact with Judaism, besides the fact that he might have been married, his first one, to a Jewish woman, there were many who, as I said, had already been established over there for the diaspora since the temple, the year 70. Okay, so most important though, so he has Jews and he has these Christians, but most important though is the existence in these Arab lands of a sect which is a Judeo-Christian sect called the Ebionites. These were Christians who wanted to preserve above all the law of Moses. Now you remember, okay, that this was the big problem that and the cause of that terrible row that St. Paul had with St. Peter. Remember the first Jewish Christians, in other words, Jews who had accepted that Christ was the Messiah, Okay, but nevertheless, at that very early time, they saw themselves as Jews. We are Jews, yeah? We just happen to believe, unlike most of our brothers and sisters, that Jesus was the Messiah, but we are Jews, yeah? So that was, they were called the particularists, to give them a name. The Universalists were also Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, but they saw the difference here, because now they accepted that the Messiah had not only come for the Jews, but for the whole of humanity. And so they didn't see themselves anymore as a subsect, as a Jewish sect, but they saw that this was something new. It was actually a new religion. Not that you had to give up, the Old Testament as we call it now, okay? But if you believe that Jesus Christ was the Messiah and he was the Son of God and he came for all humanity, that is not a continuation. There is a break there, and they saw that. Yeah, so this was the main fight amongst the early Jewish Christians. Okay, which way to go? Do we accept the Gentiles or do we not? And of course, the particularists were arguing, no, this is our religion and this is our Messiah, or not our Messiah, but it is our own thing here. What are you talking about, Gentiles? What have Gentiles got to do with anything? And the others were saying, no, but that is precisely the point. The point is that it's no longer the same, okay? So that is why Peter and Paul had that terrible row. Because Peter was being, all things to all, to all people, as it were. If he was with the Gentiles, he would behave as a Gentile. Who knows? Perhaps he even ate pork. And when he was with the Jews, he would be Jew. And of course, Paul comes, who was preaching everywhere to the Gentiles. One day he was in Persia, the other in Egypt, the others. The man didn't sleep, and he comes in and finds that Peter is very comfortably being, very nice to everybody. And he says, no, this has to be defined, this has to be St. Paul. Anyway, Peter would accept Paul's advice. Yeah. And anyway, so that was the break between, if we can call it a break, between Christianity and Judaism, in that they're going to be different religions. Of course, one based on the also in the Old Testament, but it's going to see it as a preparation, as a prophecy. Isaac was a prophecy. The prophecies of Isaac, everything is like a preparation for the new. Yeah. Okay, so these Jewish Christians, the particularists, it seems to me that these are the Ebionites, the ones that actually Muhammad is most familiar with. Okay, they believe the Messiah came, but they're Jewish, all right? It doesn't go any further than that. So let me see what the Britannica says. The Ebionite is a member of an early ascetic sect of Jewish Christians. The Ebionites were one of several such sects that originated in and around Palestine in the first centuries and included the Nazarenes and the Elkasites. My goodness, okay, so all right, so the Ebionites were a Jewish Christian sect that existed in the Levant, as Palestine, all that region, in the first century AD. They were considered heretics by Orthodox Christians because they rejected the divinity of Jesus and had a strong attachment to Jewish law. Okay, so they hadn't the Messiah, but not perhaps the divinity. Okay. Here are some things to know about the Ebionites. The beliefs The Ebionites believed that Jesus was the human son of Mary, so they are kind of Arians also, and Joseph, and the Messiah sent by God. They believed that Jesus became the Messiah by obeying the Jewish law, and that he taught his followers how to obey the law more faithfully. Okay, so he wasn't divine. The practices, the Ebionites practice an ascetic lifestyle, including vegetarianism, holy poverty, and ritual ablutions. They also rejected animal sacrifices. All right. The name Ebionite comes from the Hebrew word Ebionim, which means the poor. This is important because some think that it was because their leader was a man called Ebion. No. The Ebionites may have used the term to refer to their practice of poverty and self-sacrifice. Literature, the Ebionites' Gospel was a modified version of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They also developed their own literature, the Gospel of the Ebionites, but none of these texts has survived. The origins, the Ebionites may have been descendants of a Jewish Christian sect within the early Jerusalem church. Okay, so the Ebionites' persecution, the Ebionites left Palestine to avoid persecution and settled in Transjordan, Syria, Asia Minor, and Egypt. Little information exists on the Ebionites, and the surviving accounts are subject to considerable debate, since they are uniformly derived from the Ebionites' opponents. The first mention of the sect is in the works of the Christian theologian Saint Irenaeus, in his Against Heretics, around the year 180. Other sources include the writings of Origen and Saint Epiphanius of Constantia. The Ebionite movement may have arisen about the time of the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, in the year 70, its members evidently left Palestine to avoid persecution and settled in Transjordan, notably at Pella and Syria, and were later known to be in Asia Minor and Egypt. Okay, so these were the heirs, so let's say, to those never mind. Okay, so all right. Now, let me jump here a little bit. Okay, so Muhammad decided to give his people a new monotheistic religion. And he is actually going to study the Old Testament rigorously. When I say the Old Testament, the first 5 books, okay? The ideas inspired by Allah, God, and he's going to present himself as the now latest prophet of God. His is a mixture of Jewish law and bits and pieces of heterodox Christianity, perhaps not obviously fully understood, except for these heterodox understandings of it. So he's going to be in contact only with those so-called Christians who do not believe in Jesus being God. So that's going to be a little bit difficult. He nevertheless accepts Jesus, as the son of Mary, but Jesus is another prophet. Mary is recognized not by her virginity. As a matter of fact, in Bethlehem, in the cave, if it hasn't been bombed, you would find what Muslims actually, especially Muslim women, called the milk root, the root of the milk, where it is believed that a drop of Mary's milk from her breast fell on the ground, and it has become a sort of, I don't know that to say holy, but certainly a place where especially Muslim women go if they have problems conceiving, for example. Okay, Mary is accepted as the mother of Jesus. Okay. Now, so this is the situation, but now there is going to be an important event, an important incident that is going to take place after the death of his first wife. And this is the Miraj, a mystical vision that Muhammad had. While sleeping in the Kaava, in the temple, the angel Gabriel, who is one of the angels who are going to dictate to him the Quran, appeared to him. When he wakes up, he sees a white horse next to him called Burak, and there is a kind of ascension of Muhammad to heaven to see the Quran. They would, anyway, on this white horse, I haven't read a lot about it, so I don't know every bit of it, but anyway, they will arrive in Jerusalem, and a group of prophets of the Old and the New Testament will be there waiting for him. There is Moses, Enoch, John, Jesus, and others, and together there in the very old esplanade, the square, okay, which was at the entry of the old Jewish temple, where the old Jewish temple used to be, and in that open space there are the prophets waiting for him. Now, the famous mosque of Omar, or Dome of the Rock, is there. When he woke up then, and after prayer he rode on his horse in the air, always led by the archangel Gabriel, towards heaven, where again he found the prophets. Again he found the prophets, they are transfigured. And Allah, who recited the fundamental creed of Islam, which is, there is no other God but Allah, and Muhammad his prophet. I pause there at the transfiguration, because that would be something that the old Christians, though heretics, would have spoken about, the transfiguration of Christ. Yeah, so he found the prophets transfigured, and Allah, who recited the fundamental creed of Islam. There is one God, and there is no other God but Allah, and Muhammad his prophet, which is basically the summary of the Islamic creed. Okay, so during his stay in Medina, another extremely important and symbolic event is going to take place. During the early times, the Arabs always prayed like the Jewish people, like us Catholics before the Vatican Council too, which I always has to come up. Okay, we always prayed, okay, looking towards the Holy Land of Jerusalem. By the way, this, as I said, this custom was with us too, okay, during the Holy Mass. Okay, so the Arab world was the same, but one day the prophet who was leading prayers in the mosque built in Medina, the one in Medina, suddenly and without giving any explanation, he changed direction and turned and faced Mecca. Immediately all there present imitated him, and this was now interpreted as actually a form of renouncing his entire past, specifically to continue to see this new religion as some kind of the continuation of Judaism or some such. Okay, from then on, this was a new religion, and from then on, all Muslims face Mecca. Okay, the creed is reasonably simple. The Quran is a sacred book. You recite it or sing it. It was not inspired, as we understand it in Catholicism, it was not inspired, it was dictated and revealed by Allah to Muhammad. Now it is recited or sung in the original language, so every Muslim must learn Arabic to be a really true Muslim. It was transmitted, always according to Muslim tradition, to the Prophet, which was a passive instrument of revelation. There is nothing in the Muslim world we know similar or equivalent to biblical inspiration as we have in Christianity. In other words, the writer, the hagiographer, obviously is not using his will or his memory. It is got inspiration as the principal cause. Okay, he's just taking note. The Quran is transmitted directly, and Muhammad will repeat it. The original text is preserved in tables, like Moses' tables, in tables in heaven. The Quran, according to Muslim sources, was revealed by God, but it is important to establish there is actually no direct contact between God and men. This is important. The Muslim God, Allah, is a transcendent God, but not a God that can have any type of direct contact with men. He is far off. He created the world and then let it be. There is no filial relationship there. Okay, that's different. Now, Muhammad, the Muslims themselves assent to this. Muhammad was illiterate, so its actual writing cannot be attributed to him. But during the space of 23 years, the archangel would have dictated to him the words dictated by God, first memorized and then written later. In Medina, the Quran was dictated in parts. If he forgot something, the archangel Gabriel would remind him in his ear, each piece by piece. Now, when we talk about revelation, what do we understand the same thing? What is revelation according to the Muslim world? Well, the first version of the Quran was transmitted to the Jews, they believe, but they falsified it and did not recognize Jesus as the last of the prophets. So the Jews were left aside, they were left behind, and God is going to reveal himself to the Christians. But they also made a huge mistake and fell into idolatry by believing that Jesus was God. So they themselves will show respect for Isu. For example, in the verses of the Quran 3:39, he is one more prophet. He's a prophet. And that is why the conduct of a good Muslim vis-a-vis the Jews or the Christians, I'm not talking about the war now, okay, just generally, the relationship towards the Jews or Christians who resist to accept Islam should be the following. In Quran 3:28, quote, that the faithful shall not take as friends the unbelievers in place of those who believe. Whosoever does this is away from Allah, has nothing to do with Allah. Okay, taking unbelievers as friends. Another quote, 9:5. Kill their associates wherever you may find them. Capture the besieged and lay all kinds of ambushes for them. But if they retract from their heresy, establish prayer with them. Another quote, 2:29. Fight against them until there are no more options and their worship is only to God. Okay, so the definite version, according to Islam, of the Quran transmitted to humanity is the Arabic version. The content of the Quran is sacred, and this is why it has been retained verbatim, okay, and in the original language. There is perhaps some parallel here with the Moses of the Old Testament, or okay. But this thing about verbatim is important. For example, you cannot change any word at all. If I give you an example, I cannot give you an Arabic word because I don't know Arabic. But say as an example an English word. Let's say love. Imagine that love is written sometimes with a V, as it should, and sometimes with a B, let's say, okay? You cannot change that, which is obviously, that word which is obviously misspelled, okay? You have to leave that. That's how important it is. You have to leave it like that. So you can write that word love, let's say, okay, in both ways, because in the Quran it is written in both ways. Okay, this is just an example with an English word, just to emphasize how important it is. Okay. Now, there is a scholar who, well, his name was Thierry, but he wrote under a pseudonym, scholar of the Quran, Hannah Zacharias, From Moses to Muhammad. The title of the book is Islam, a Jewish Enterprise. And he is going to put forward something that some scholars have considered. I have no way of knowing whether it is true or partly true or a quarter true or false completely. I don't know. But he offers a completely different version of the official one. He is nevertheless a scholar of the Quran. And according to him, and I quote, "The Quran is nothing more than the simple and pure translation or transliteration, perhaps, explanation for the Bible, a kind of Bible explained explicitly for the Arabs." Yeah, sort of a Bible as it would be explained to the Arabs. The stories of Abraham, Noah, Adam are narrated there, as well as Lot, Moses, the prophets, John the Baptist, the Virgin Mary, Jesus, etc. And in his opinion, Muhammad had little to do with the actual writing of this book. The Quran would then be the result, actually, he believes, of the preaching of a rabbi, probably a Pharisee of a Pharisaic tendency, who had simply proposed to Judaize Arabia, okay, to evangelize, we would say, okay, Arabia. So in this way, Muhammad would not have been asked to found a third religion. There is a great, he explains that there is a great deal of similarities with the Jewish world in many things, and it's a kind of a simplified Judaism, he says. Apparently, Muhammad knew of the translation to the Arab language, Arabic, of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. In fact, the similarities between the Pentateuch and the and the Quran are astonishing, and very, very many. Many of its passages, he says, and he explains and puts it to you, are like entire transpositions. That's the way he sees it. Now, its principal doctrinal element coincide with those of the Jewish Christians, such as, for example, the Jewish and the Christians, such as, for example, the uniqueness of God, his omnipotence, his benevolence, divinity, creating power, the heavenly world, angels, demons, Satan as the leader of the malign world, the commandments. All these seem like copied from the Jewish or even Christian world, as well as the 3 main anthropological truths, that is, the immortality of the soul, eschatology, in other words, the end of times and punishment or rewards, man's responsibility for his actions, yes, punishment and rewards after death. These are Jewish and Christian. But for Catholics, it is important to note that for those who might be a little bit confused or disoriented, which is easy these times, they are not 3 equal religions. The 3 of them are monotheistic, yes, and the 3 of them are called the religions of the book, or the peoples of the book. But there is a major difference between Christianity and Judaism and Islam, and that is that the word was made flesh. The Logos, the Word, the second person of the Trinity, the Son incarnated. All right, so the Word was made flesh. The Word was not made book. That is a major difference. Okay. We cannot say that it is the same God, because by saying that, you're not accepting the Son as God or the Holy Trinity. It's the same in that it's an omnipotent God, yes, but Christianity is different from the other 2 religions. Despite the similarities that can be pointed out also, Okay. Yes, I just wrote here what I've just said. The most important between Catholicism and Judaism and Islam, the major difference. The essential difference between theirs and ours is their absolute denial of the Word made flesh, the second person of the Trinity that incarnates to redeem us, to save us, to open for us the gates of heaven. For Judaism, as for Islam, this is blasphemy, that God was made man. We only have to remember the text and what we read during Holy Week, for example, the Passion of the Lord. He has blasphemed, besides, the negation of the incarnation involves, as I said, the denial of the dogma of the Holy Trinity. That is why we do not have the same God as these religions, though monotheistic, because both of them deny Jesus Christ as God. All right, let's move on. So, also the sacramental structures, the Eucharist, Christ leaving himself behind as a continual sacrifice for humanity, the ordination of priests, the marriage as a sacrament, and so on. Okay, now, in a study on Islam, an author, Ruben Calderon Bossuet, okay, highly recommended. He actually has an idea similar to the previous one, but he says that Muhammad had been perhaps entrusted by a rabbi in Mecca, probably a relative of his first wife, Hadija, to actually preach the Torah to his people in Arabic. That was the first idea. The rabbi would have detailed the history of Moses to persuade him of the fact that he would be like a Moses for the Arabs, and the Arabs believe that Allah spoke to the Arabs through him. According to the previous author, Father Terry, Islam is like the extension of Judaism among the Arabs. It became that as a plot, he says, by a rabbi in Mecca who was seconded in this plan by an Arab, Muhammad, and perhaps whose wife nudged him a little bit towards Judaism. The French-English historian Hilaire Belloc, he is from the first half of the 20th century, great historian. He also said, according to him, Islam, he said, is a heresy. It's a heresy of both, of the Jewish and the Christian religions, in a broad sense. When Belloc writes about the three great heresies, he puts Islam as a Judeo-Christian one. Because he explains that its initial thing was not actually its origin was not actually to create a new religion, but ended up as a heresy of both. All right. So now another source of Islamic doctrine is the Hadith. Hadith or Hadith. This transmits mainly the teachings of Muhammad, its prophet, narrated by the imams. This would be something like equivalent to our tradition, perhaps. And so that is the second one. And then the third one, finally, the Sharia or Islamic law of enormous importance, nowadays especially for us here in the West, it's sacred law, which is set out from a great collection of teachings of Muhammad's sayings and adapted to the times and circumstances that were developed by the juridical schools, something similar to the Talmud for the Jewish world. Talmud, also a collection of teachings and so on from the 5th century AD. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the pillars of Islam morality. There are 5 pillars: faith, prayer, the giving of alms, fasting, pilgrimage to Mecca, and holy war. Okay. It's kind of doable. It's simple. Faith, okay, a profession of faith with the formula. It starts, there is but one God, Allah, and His Prophet Muhammad. We said before that they're accepted as truth. Allah's revelations received by Muhammad. With this formula, after you accept that and okay, you believe it, with this formula you enter into the community of believers, and this formula is recited 5 times during the day. 5 times a day a Muslim has to proclaim this creed. The prayer consists in reciting also text from the Quran, accompanied by acts of worship in the direction facing Mecca 5 times a day, for regular contact with Allah and a relative distancing from the world. Hence, it can be done anywhere, but to distance yourself during prayer from the world, the ritual is, you might have seen it, there is a small rug, to separate, ritually to separate yourself from the profane. It is important to highlight that for a Muslim there is no filial relationship with Allah. It is a distant God who rules over believers but never dialogues with him. There's no personal relationship there, least of all a friendship. Their God is purely transcendence, an unfathomable mystery. Almsgiving is obligatory. A believer has to help relatives, poor people with their alms, orphans, contributing to the support and the promotion of Islam. The fasting, Ramadan, lasts 1 month, actually 40 days. It changes according to the year. It's kind of similar to our Lent, as it were. It's to be kept during that fasting has to be kept during the whole day until the setting of the sun, and you have to abstain yourself from food and drink as well as sexual relations. There are other precepts taken from the Jews also, such as abstention from wine and pork. It is said that Ramadan is probably actually one of the, not intentionally so, but it ends up being perhaps one of the most violent times of the year. You cannot eat or drink until twilight, and man without food or drink, you are, excited or frustrated. Sometimes, in other words, that sometimes there is more violence during these times than during the rest of the year. Another precept is the pilgrimage to Mecca. If you are in a position to do so, you are under this religious obligation at least once in a lifetime. Pilgrimage to Mecca. Visit the Kaava, the secret place. There is no place in Islam for original sin and sanctifying grace. You must live in harmony with the brotherhood of believers in Allah. Muhammad condemned pride and greed, lies, debauchery, abolished human sacrifices for sure, the abandonment of children, curbed polygamy, limiting it to 4 legitimate wives, as many within this number as a man can maintain. The holy war, the jihad, against non-Muslims is a political obligation because it fulfills the duty of solidarity. He is a martyr child who succumbs during the jihad. The Muslim who kills and dies, according to the Quran 9.112. The holy war is a religious ideal. Those who fall are considered martyrs in the faith, and this means entering directly into paradise as a pleasing sacrifice to Allah. The Muslim paradise is a gorgeous, beautiful garden you can lay on couches layered with beautiful brocades. Men drink the living water of the fountain and eternally enjoy of the virgins in paradise. Okay, this is also the question of martyrdom is different from Christianity, because in this case it would be if you kill for your religion, you are a martyr. In Christianity, it is if you die, if you are killed for your religion. And additionally, it's not enough just to be killed. If while you're being killed, you hate and detest that man, you're not a martyr. In other words, you have to be killed for it, but at the same time, truly forgiving him for that crime. Yeah. So it's a different understanding of martyrdom here. All right, let's move on. Islam is not a stranger to claims of universality. Believers consider themselves committed to the defense of the rights of God, his primacy, priority. Muhammad saw war as a means to overcome resistance, but that was that. But in reality, it became the means of expansion for Islam. So I will come back to that. Infidels who once conquered, adhered to, accepted Islam, little by little will join the community of believers. And if they resist, they will be stripped of their property or reduced to slavery. This was obviously in the earlier times. We don't hear much about this nowadays. When one hears about slavery, I must remind you that it was the church who actually was the first one to gradually abolish it. Little is said of the number of Christian slaves in the hands of Muslims. The famous one, for me certainly, I told you this before, is the writer of El Quijote himself, Cervantes. He was slave of the Muslims for 5 years. After he came from the Lepanto War, he lost his left arm. Anyway, this did not mean that Islam was always, nevertheless, trying to impose itself by violence on Jews and Christians, because remember, they are for them the people of the book, and were tolerated to a certain extent as being part of the common revelation, the people that revelation had come before. Thanks to the Holy War, and without intending to achieve the unity of the Arab world, it's going to... I didn't write this properly, but what is going to happen now is that a new force, a new political force through religion is going to be created, nationalism. Muhammad did not think of a war strictly against Christianity, but in the desire for conquest that is going to rise in the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, Christians who possessed the major part of the land were the Arabs were going to put their eyes on, and never for purely religious motives. Expansion gave a great influence, had a great influence in terms of commerce, in the commercial sphere. Remember that the whole of, I keep saying this, but it's really quite amazing, on both sides of the Mediterranean. Remember that the whole of northern Africa, all the way to Persia, was Christian at the time. And when I say northern Africa, it's not just that little sliver. If you take not all the way to Black Africa, but that major part there at the top, all that Mauritania, all that was Christian, and nevertheless this expansion happened very, very, very rapidly. And that was the question that I had in my mind. I can accept how history, people's change and so on, but so rapid and so extensive, how in such little time? That was the thought, the question I had in my mind as I was reading all this. And not only were they Christians, but I mean, in the last video I show you how the first monasteries, the ascetic life, came from the Berbers, St. Augustine, the first monasteries. So during the first 7 centuries, that part of the world was Christian, and it all disappeared almost overnight. I have something here. Okay, the conquest of Islam. In the year 632, his disciple Abu Bakr, born in 573, died in August 23rd, 634. He was Muhammad's closest companion and advisor. He's the one who's going to continue with the expansion very successfully. He succeeded the Prophet's political and administrative functions, thereby initiating the office of the Caliph. He took the leadership of the movement with the title of Caliph, or Chief of the Believers, repressing the unrest of the tribes, many other tribes, and completing the conquest of the peninsula of Arabia. Later, it will be his friend and successor, the famous Caliph Omar, from 634 to 44, who was a very shrewd politician and formed a formidable army, and who also understood that to have the army and the ranks of the army focused in unison, it was necessary for them to be engaged, to be sent off to conquests. Many of the empires, he felt, many times disappeared or became very weak because of this lack of focus. So you need that passion, that focus, and without it, that expansive force would actually, its spirit would decline or dissipate. You have to keep them engaged. The Holy War will start in 643 against the Byzantine and Persian empires. He will direct the attacks in the direction of to hit the merchant caravans, first towards Asia Minor, Turkey, and reviewing little by little the entire area: Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, Iraq, Egypt, all will fall under Islam. In the year 635, they will attack Syria, take the city of Damascus, and so from Mecca and Medina, the Muslim center is going to go now to Damascus, where there will be established there a caliphate. In the year 638, we'll see the conquest, very harsh conquest of Palestine, the year 638. Specifically of the Holy Land, Jerusalem, which had resisted as much as it could under with the Caliph Omar. So he went to the ancient, as for now there, just where the temple had been, the plaza, took possession of the place, and he is going to build a mosque there, which carries his name, the famous Mosque of Omar, or the Dome of the Rock, as it is known. It is the same place where the Jews had the altar of the Holocausts, and where Muhammad opened the heavens to the Quran to be revealed when he went there with the white horse and so on. That was the place. This is one of the most important religious centers. That is why there is so much discussion in the Holy Land, more than discussion. But that is why the Jews obviously don't know quite what to do with this mosque there, because it is precisely in the place of the old Solomon temple, which, remember, the Roman generals tried to build oh my goodness, so much with this, because the Roman generals, I forget the name now, had tried to build there a temple to Jupiter. Didn't happen. Someone else had tried to build another temple, Jewish temple, and I think it was Julian the Apostate, actually. And because he just hated Christianity, so he was just going to rub it in and build the temple, the Jewish temple, and all kinds of things were happening. Fires, winds, storms, that they had to give it up anyway. So, okay. I didn't know that it was right here where the temple used to be. I don't know that this is correct. Exactly the same place. Okay. Okay, so where was I? Then the fall of Egypt, as we said, who wanted to stop and organize the attack, but he wanted to go against Egypt, but somehow here they had to stop. He couldn't push the warriors anymore, but will advance to destroy the empire of Egypt in the year 640. The Byzantine army will be defeated near Cairo after the famous city of Alexandria fell. Now, the Muslims are going to be divided into two main sectors. As we know now, the Sunnis, or rather they're called the democratic, okay, in inverted commas, you will see why, and the Shia, the monastics. It won't be long before they experience internal political turbulence amongst themselves. Until then, Muhammad's successors had been his friends, his best preferred political followers, and they will be called the Sunnis. They supported the succession in Islam by choice and not by blood or kinship. This is the majority today, almost 80%. But there was another sector which is going to take the side of Muhammad's relatives, supporting Ali and Fatima, his daughter, Ali the successor. The Caliph did not have to be, in other words, they believed that the Caliph does not have to be elected, but had to be a member of the family of Muhammad. And these are between 15 and 20%, found in Iran and Iraq especially. In Egypt, the Arabs are going to favor the Christians who were already against Byzantium. They're going to retain the patriarchates of Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch. The hierarchy will be reconstituted throughout the 8th century. So Christianity is not going to disappear completely. The missionaries are going to do so, but they're going to export other missionaries, but not 100% Catholics. In Egypt, there will be many Nestorians, and these will be the ones who go as missionaries to Tibet and China. So the first who went there were heterodox Christians. Constantinople is threatened now as part of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Arabs carried out their functions raiding Asia Minor, along the Mediterranean islands, Cyprus, Rhodes, Crete, while the Bulgarians and the Slavs, their companions, will start attacking from the north and attack Constantinople between the years 673 to 677. So they were being attacked by land and by sea. Byzantium is going to be to have to pay tribute now, and the door to Europe is going to remain closed for a few centuries for Islam yet. We know about the invasion of Spain all the way up to France, and anyway, won't go into that, but by the year in the 11th century, I have here, there were only, yes, in the 11th century, in actually the year 1000, there were only 5 bishops left in the whole of that area, Christian bishops left. So they went also from Spain all the way to France. In France, eventually they were stopped. There is a break. Charles Martel, in the Battle of Poitiers in the year 732, stopped them. But they would keep they would then go to Sicily. Never mind that. Okay, so they were everywhere. So, why, this is my question now, why, I can understand people winning wars, and expanding, and all right, so much so quickly. What was the reason for this conversion? Convinced that their religion would triumph everywhere, that universality. One God to whom all creatures are subjected, and the divine vision of Muhammad. Future life is faithful to this elemental creed. The morality rules are simple, but it does not go against the passions of man, but actually encourages them, which is easier. There is no asceticism. On the contrary, there is an unleashing of passions, especially for men. A Muslim historian said that it would take 3 days for someone to become a Muslim. It takes about 3 years of catechumen study to transmit the culture and religion of the Christian religion. The economic conditions along the Mediterranean, where millions of peasants were amid continuous wars, could have been a factor if debtors admit that Muhammad was the prophet of God and that the new teachings had divine authority. All debts were forgiven. In other areas, if you were to continue in certain areas where you could continue being a Christian, you would have to pay heavy tribute. Christianity was by now facing, it was defeated, exhausted, unarmed, internal divisions. It was now going to be a sort of a holy war against another holy war, the cross against the half moon. In the north of Spain, where I'm from, in Santiago de Compostela, and that beautiful cathedral where St. James is buried, there in the year 718, after the invasion, the Arabs invaded in 711, they took the bells of the cathedral all the way to Cordoba. Anyway, that's another thing. This is what I want to say now to answer my own question. See if you agree with this. I think what happened here, apart from, I'm not doubting the faith and the conversion of those for whom it made sense and converted. All right, but the appeal, I'm saying that it goes back to first principles, because you see, for all these people of the Semitic race who were all Arabs, you go back to Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael, okay? And to a certain extent, you could also play with the fact that the Jews and therefore the Christians were that side, but we are of the side of Ishmael. Okay, and it's very easy. You would actually convince me, you see, that you cannot be on that side. This is our side, the side of Ishmael. You don't need great economic incentives and so on to feel that you should be part of it. It makes sense. It goes to first principles, and I think that this is the reason. I know it's very simple, but I think eventually it goes to these first principles, that feeling that yes, this makes sense to me. these are my people, and we are all together on this one side, not on the other side. That is why I think it was so successful to begin with. Yes, during the wars, when they were confronting the people. Anyway, so this is don't know how long I have been speaking here. Okay, so this is my video for today. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope you will leave me a comment or subscribe or do all those things. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.